He was born Chaim Witz on August 25, 1949, long before the world knew Gene Simmons, the demon. Before the boots, before the fire, before the merchandise empire, there was a boy in a tiny room where winter seeped through thin walls and a sewing machine hummed late into the night. His mother, Flora, a Holocaust survivor, kept them alive one button at a time. Hunger sat at their table like a quiet guest. Silence pressed on the walls. And the child made a promise, "I will never be poor again." Immigrant stories begin with water. In 1957, a gray ocean carried Flora and her son from Israel to New York City. No money, no English, only survival stitched into their bones. In Queens, the boy changed his name, learned fast, and worked faster. He sold fruit at the curb, carried cactus plants door to door, wiped counters, sliced deli meat, anything that turned sweat into rent. When the world felt cruel, he hid in comic books. Panels of heroes forged by pain taught him a simple code: power is built, not granted. He traced English words with trembling fingers and taught himself to sound like the place he wanted to belong. Then, a Sunday night changed everything. February 9, 1964, the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. The country screamed. The boy decided, "I want that life." He tried on normal for a while, teacher by day, dreamer by night, but the thunder inside wouldn't quiet. With Paul Stanley came the first drafts of Destiny, bands with temporary names, Hope with permanent hunger. A false start at Electric Lady Studios hurt, but it taught him his first empire rule. Failure isn't a wall, it's firewood. In 1973, Four Faces stepped onto a small stage and rewrote Spectacle. Kiss wasn't only a band, it was a vision. Black wings around the eyes, blood, fire, armor. The demon wasn't pretend. He was the boy's revenge, fearless where the child had felt small, loud where the child had been silenced. They didn't have radio at first. They had rumor. They had the show, and then they had the world alive. Detonated in 1975, saving their label and branding their names into stadium steel. Destroyer lifted the chaos into cathedral sound, choirs over guitars, thunder under melody. For a while, the stage lights felt like sunrise, but success charges a fee. Inside the machine, ego scraped, addictions bit, and bad choices multiplied. There were missteps, the kind critics frame and fans forgive slowly. There were nights when arenas roared and mornings when the quiet hurt more than the volume ever did. The brand expanded, lunchboxes, pinball, comic books, because Simmons believed a hard truth. If you don't own it, it owns you. He didn't just sell a band. He architected a universe. By the early 80s, the makeup had become myth and a cage. So they did the unthinkable. They took it off. Lick It Up went platinum and proved what the armor had hidden. Beneath the paint were survivors. Trends came and went. Crowds waxed and thinned. But the engine kept moving because the engine was will. When the music paused, Simmons learned to multiply. Acting roles, licensing, deals. If the world was a marketplace, he would arrive as both artist and merchant. And then, like Thunder Returning, 1996, the classic lineup reunited, the makeup restored, and stadiums shook again. Fathers brought sons. Mothers sang along. Fire burst into the sky, and the old dream stood tall with new legs. Personal life never stays backstage. Love entered the picture, complicated and human. Famous names, fragile promises, visible mistakes. And then Shannon Tweed, the one who stayed, the one who challenged the armor, the one who asked for certainty instead of spotlight. The road to their 2011 wedding wasn't polished, it was earned. The vow wasn't a fairy tale, it was a reckoning. For a man shaped by abandonment, permanence stopped being a prison and became a promise. The hardest chapter arrived in 2018 when his mother, Flora Klein, passed. The demon vanished, only a son remained, standing by the coffin of the woman who had worked her hands raw so he could eat. He would say, "Everything I am began with her." He honored her by supporting education and remembrance, proof that legacy can be louder than applause. Age tests all legends. There were health scares, the kind that remind even giants they're made of skin and time. There were controversies and business moves the public debated. Some choices he'd do again. Some he wouldn't. But here is the pattern. He doesn't quit. He adjusts. He builds. He learns where the noise ends and the person begins. Today, Gene Simmons is more than the sum of his myths. He's an architect of scale, royalties that don't sleep, restaurants with rock and roll roots, licensing that turned a logo into an economy. People guess at the number attached to his name. The real number is harder to count. Nights survived. Bills paid. Jobs created. Dreams licensed into reality. Walk through his world, and you'll see it. Stage costumes behind glass like knights' armor resting after decades of war. Gold and platinum records stacked like shields that once intercepted doubt. Those famous 7-inch platform boots retired from battle, now monuments to a simple idea. Spectacle is serious work, but the wealth isn't the lesson. The cost is every dollar echoes a wound, cold nights, cheap coats, empty plates. Every deal is a promise to the child who whispered in the dark, "We will not be hungry again." And every time the lights went down and the body asked for mercy, he learned the line between ambition and endurance. Look closer, and the story shrinks in the best way. Mornings with Shannon. Calls to Nick and Sophie just to hear their voices. The bass in his lap catching sunlight instead of stage light. Not retirement, recalibration. Not silence as surrender. Silence as mastery. People argue about what KISS means, about merch, about masks, about what's real. Here's what's undeniable. A kid who started with hunger and humiliation built something that wouldn't be ignored. He turned trauma into theater, theater into business, business into legacy. He taught a generation of artists the part most schools never teach. Own your name. If you want poetry, there's poetry. An immigrant boy watched his mother stitch buttons until her fingers bled, then grew up and stitched a brand so tight it wrapped the world. He unmasked on camera and proved that belief outlasts paint. He failed in public, got back up in public, loved imperfectly, then chose to stay. He lost the person who made him and honored her by becoming a maker. Is he polarizing? Of course, that's what happens to people who build loudly. But listen past the arguments and you'll hear what remains. Endurance. The kind that outlives trends, detours, and headlines. The kind that turns a backstage hustle into a blueprint. So if his music ever steadied you, if the fire and the theater gave you permission to be bigger than your fear, take this with you. Greatness isn't the roar. It's the refusal to go quiet when the room empties. It's the immigrant vow kept across decades. It's the moment a mask becomes a mirror and the person underneath decides to be brave without it. Gene Simmons didn't just play the demon. He engineered one out of hunger, out of cold, out of a mother's sacrifice, and used it to bulldoze a path where none existed. The empire is real, yes, but the lesson is better. Pain can be repurposed. Survival can be styled. Work is a superpower. Ownership is armor. And when the last spotlight fades and the surf keeps its patient time against the shore, what remains isn't a headline or a bank balance. It's a man who kept a promise to a child in the dark, from hunger to thunder, from silence to spectacle, from Keimwitz to Gene Simmons. If that fire ever lit your way through a bad night, hit like, leave your story, tell the next kid who's cold and unheard that from nothing is still the best place to begin.